Chapter 18. Deflated Testes. "Well, this is pleasant," Malcolm said, at a silence so awkward it felt vilified. "I must say, if I knew things were going to turn out this way, I would have hired a hearse." Guests stared uncomfortably at everything except Thomas. Through a large expanse of glass, the city shone in gold and silver lights, and seemed to be having a great time. In Malcolm's apartment, however, dinner had turned into quite the opposite. "I did warn her," Thomas said, clasping a wet flannel over an eye. "I told Janice I'm no good at dinner parties, so I'm surprised any of this comes as a shock to her." He pressed harder at the flannel and held a piece of ice above his other one. There was only a bit of blood, mainly from the cut the man had inadvertently reopened. The man didn't fare much better, having been forced to reabsorb a testicle when Thomas's knee insisted upon it, and sat whimpering on his chair, rocking and turning a strange shade of green. Janice had slunk as low as she could in her chair without falling from it. A woman beside her rested a hand in commiseration upon her shoulder. When Thomas had tried to do the same to her other one, Janice hit him, which wasn't surprising, considering he was responsible for her needing commiserations in the first place. "Oh, come on," Thomas said. "Is any of this particularly surprising? Who'd want to have a dinner party with the one person you all revile? If it makes you feel any better, I feel like Jesus at a Roman bath without a towel." "So you're comparing yourself to Jesus now?" Malcolm said. "Circumstantially, yes. Do you know we share the same middle name?" "What?" "Jesus and I share the same middle name." "Middle name? What middle name? Jesus didn't have a middle name." "He certainly did, and it's Harold." "Harold?" "Yes." "Harold is Jesus's middle name?" Thomas nodded. "Ironic, don't you think, considering Herod was such a bastard?" "Why don't you just leave? I'll tell you what would have been even more ironic, if Herod's middle name had been Jesus." "I think we'd be much better off without you." "You see," Thomas said to the wilting form of Janice, "I told you, didn't I? I told you they wanted nothing to do with me." He said to them all, "I mean, why would you? Why would the people who have strapped my name to a long turd, dragged both through mud and shoved it through their printing presses be surprised to discover that I'm anything other than ghastly?" "You could have at least tried," a woman hissed. "I can assure you, dear lady, that this is me trying. It was either this or sitting in a corner rocking backwards and forwards naked while squeezing bananas between my toes." "Bananas?" "Yes." "Why bananas?" "Because apples give me blisters. Look, I didn't even want to come. I begged Janice for the past month not to make me, and I did the same in the corridor outside. I warned her that this evening would end with the sort of disaster that makes Chernobyl look like a good way to cook eggs. Honestly, she's worse than my mother." "You really are a wanker, aren't you?" the woman sneered. "Actually, I'm not." "Look what you've done to her," Malcolm said. "Look at Janice, she's humiliated. Fortunately, we know her well enough to realise what a gorgeous, kind and talented woman she is. So your behaviour tonight, Thomas, reflects entirely on you, at what an unadulterated git you are. Similarly, it speaks volumes about her compassion to even consider helping a prat like you." "It always amazes me, the number of people mistaking git and prat for the same thing." "They are the same thing, you pillock." "No, they're not," said Thomas. "They're spelt differently for a start. They do not, as the masses assume, mean idiot. Git refers to the joint on a type of 16th century ploughing harness which is prone to breaking once the leather wears, whereas prat has its origins in a mindless squabble of words that has each involved none the wiser." "Is this some pathetic attempt at proving your knowledge of words?" Malcolm fumed. "No more than your column in The Guardian is." "At least I'm published." "Oh, indeed, Malcolm. How your prose endures. Tell me, for how long does your literary genius stimulate the minds of those able to read it? A century? A generation? No, Malcolm, a week. A week, and then it's forgotten about as quickly as the chips that wraps grows cold." Malcolm stood. "I think you'd better leave." "Oh, nothing would please me more, other than having not arrived in the first place, of course." "But first," said Malcolm, You're going to apologise. I'm going to what? Apologise to Janice, for a start, and then to Gavin. Gavin? Yes. He pointed at the green man. It's not my fault he ingested a testicle, said Thomas. He should have kept both of them out of it. You need him in the groin. What sort of man needs another man in the groin? A man who's not comfortable having another man's testicles that close to his own. And anyway, he shouldn't have tried removing mine first. I can assure you that it was a class action. Thomas glared. Well, it's a pity you didn't have a go first, Malcolm, as it's clear you haven't got any testicles. Malcolm, shuddering with rage, launched himself at Thomas with a growl suggesting he had two very large ones that had won prizes. A collective cry went up from the table. Malcolm made two fists, each about the size of his testicles, and tried belting Thomas with one of them. But having had far less to drink, Thomas dodged it and grabbed the other with his flannel, which he twisted to spin Malcolm in a manner suggesting they'd been dancing partners for years and were considering turning professional, up until Thomas kneed him in the testicles. Malcolm collapsed with a groan, went red, and then blue, before hissing as though one of them had popped. Two women fell to his side, while those remaining at the table winced and clutched themselves. Janice's saggy udder impression worsened, to drag along the ground and begin furrowing soil. Flooded with triumph and shame, Thomas held his pose, glaring at them all in case others wanted to go. But they returned his glare with the sort of loathing generally requiring a license. One woman patted Malcolm's hand, while the other had an ear against his chest, either to check his breathing or the state of his testicles. Either way, she wasn't impressed. That's the most pathetic thing I've ever seen, she growled at Thomas. What, his testicles? She stood and swore at him. Thomas swallowed and took a step backwards. Women generally didn't have testicles, which left him uneasy. You can't just go around kneeing people in the groin, she cried, particularly men. But he was trying to punch me, they both were. Only because you're such an incredulous wanker. Thomas admired his knuckles to imply they were as deadly as his knee. I'm sorry, lady, but I am not going to let myself be assaulted. It was self-defense. I learned that in training as a spy. You should defend yourself like a man, she cried. Not a 7-year-old girl. I was defending myself like a man. I thought those moves were rather impressive. Did you see my flannel? You need him in the groin, you wanker. What is impressive about that? Wanker, listen, lady, they're the ones rolling around moaning and clutching their testicles. You know what? She said, stepping over the body. It's true. You're not even a wanker, because even wankers know when to stop. You have no idea, do you? I've never met anyone so self-obsessed. Not only are you delusional, but you're pathologically incapable of respecting others' feelings. She pointed at Janice, who was doing an impressive impression of the Titanic the morning after. Apparently she wanted to help you. She cared. She thought there was something worthwhile in the swathes of shit that you write. But you know what? The one redeeming feature of shit is that it can be flushed. Something your books can't be. And believe me, I've tried. I find it's best to tear them up first. Let me tell you something, Thomas. Look up the definitions of paragraph and sentence, because it seems to me you have one confused with the other. Sorry, I'm confused. Well, let me put it another way, she said, folding her arms. You convolute your supposed ideas with masses of inherent redundancy through a smear of random letters which on occasion resemble a traditional alphabet. Thomas stared at her. You were responsible for that. No, Thomas, you were. That's the problem. You don't even see that you've got one. But thankfully, this evening has proved to everyone just how massive it is, and if Janice still believes you don't, then as both her friends and colleagues, we will ensure that after this evening, she certainly does. Thomas looked at Janice. She was trembling. He wanted to say things to her, but being the worst writer in the world, he struggled to find words, except her name, which probably wouldn't suffice under the circumstances. The woman took a step closer. Leave, she said. Oh, I intend to. He glanced around the table. but a collective loathing had its occupants looking elsewhere. His bottle of wine remained. "This is mine," he said, taking it. "I brought it with me. Well, one like it anyway." "Leave." He glanced at Janice a final time, before leaving the table. "Oh," he said, turning back to them. "When Malcolm recovers, tell him to get some walls in this place. It's dangerous." "It's not dangerous, you stupid wanker. It's designed to be open plan." "Well, what a fortunate coincidence," said Thomas, eyeing its still moaning owner, considering the same could now be said of his testicles.